The CNN studio lights blazed with an intensity that seemed to mirror the tension crackling through the air. Actor Jonathan Roumie sat perfectly composed across from Chilean television host Patricia Maldonado, his dark eyes focused with the precision of someone who had spent countless hours studying the intricacies of political discourse. What started as Anderson Cooper's routine, Friday night political discussion was about to explode into one of the most viral political moments of the year, a moment that would fundamentally change how America viewed both figures. Maldonado, radiating the confidence that came from years of engaging in heated political debates, had just made a sweeping statement about constitutional law that revealed a shocking gap in her legal knowledge. The television host, who was used to defending conservative ideologies, had no idea she was about to face someone whose expertise would expose her claims as dangerously uninformed. But Roumie, armed with a deep understanding of constitutional principles and a sharp mind, was ready to deliver a masterclass in legal education that would leave millions of viewers speechless and political commentators applauding. The studio's atmosphere was electric. Camera operators sensed something brewing as they captured the subtle tension between the two figures. Maldonado leaning back with political confidence, Roumie sitting forward with the focused intensity of someone about to dismantle a poorly constructed argument. Even the production crew seemed to recognize they were about to witness something extraordinary. What happened in the next 30 seconds didn't just embarrass a seasoned television personality on national television. It exposed a fundamental misunderstanding of constitutional law that shocked legal experts from Harvard to Yale. The clip would break the internet within hours, generating over 50 million views across platforms as #RoumieSchools. Maldonado trended globally. Viewers worldwide watched in amazement as a seasoned television personality who had spent years defending conservative views was dismantled by an actor with a deep understanding of the law. The moment would be studied in law schools, celebrated by civil rights organizations, and turned into countless memes. Legal scholars would call it the most devastating constitutional takedown in cable news history, while political commentators struggled to find adequate comparisons for the systematic destruction they'd witnessed. Before we dive into this epic constitutional showdown that changed American political discourse, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these incredible political moments that define our democracy. Comment where you're watching from. We love hearing from our international viewers who appreciate American political drama. Ring that notification bell because moments like these don't happen often. But when they do, they're absolutely unmissable. Now let's see exactly how Jonathan Roumie just rewrote the rules of political debate and delivered a masterclass in constitutional law that will be remembered for decades. To understand why this confrontation was so explosive, you need to know exactly who these two figures are and why their clash was inevitable. Jonathan Roumie represents everything the New Democratic Party stands for. At 43, he's an actor who made his name in political and social discussions, defending the rights of ordinary people against powerful interests. Before entering the world of politics, Roumie spent years in media engaging with issues such as voting rights, criminal justice reform, and civil liberties. His understanding of these topics is sharp, and he doesn't back down from anyone, whether in a film set or in public discourse. Roumie rose to prominence in the political and social circles, known for his ability to engage in serious debates and advocate for social change. What really set him apart was his ability to cite historical facts and legal principles in defense of his arguments, often catching even seasoned politicians off guard with his intellectual precision. His reputation for understanding complex societal issues grew rapidly. Scholars began noting his remarkable ability to cut through political spin with historical and legal facts. Patricia Maldonado, on the other hand, represents a more traditional conservative voice. The 72-year-old Chilean television host has built a career around defending right-wing ideologies. Known for her outspoken conservative views, she rose to prominence as a media personality, regularly appearing on television programs to voice her strong political opinions. However, her background is not rooted in legal or constitutional expertise. Her experience lies primarily in media and political commentary, often focusing on delivering powerful messages rather than engaging in deep legal or academic discussions. The contrast between the two figures was stark. While Roumie, though not formally trained in law, demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of constitutional matters and human rights, Maldonado's lack of legal knowledge became evident as she engaged in the debate. Her attempts to defend conservative legal views were met with a precise, fact-based legal response that exposed her fundamental misunderstanding of the Constitution. What followed was not just a political debate, it was a constitutional masterclass. Roumie, with his vast understanding of history, law, and human rights, skillfully dismantled Maldonado's arguments, turning her rhetoric against her. The moment, which began as a simple political discussion, quickly escalated into a viral spectacle as Roumie delivered his legal takedown. The clip quickly gained millions of views, shared across social media, legal forums, and political blogs. Legal scholars hailed Roumie's ability to stay calm, focused, and precise as he deconstructed Maldonado's points, showcasing the importance of understanding legal foundations in political debates. The viral moment was more than just a defeat for Patricia Maldonado. It was a wake-up call to politicians and public figures who attempt to engage in legal debates without the necessary knowledge. In the weeks following the broadcast, countless legal experts used the clip as a case study for political figures who should be well-versed in constitutional law before attempting to discuss it publicly. The exchange didn't just change the public perception of these two figures, it also reinforced the importance of genuine expertise in political and legal discussions. In the end, Jonathan Roumie didn't just win an argument, he set a new standard for how public figures should engage with complex legal issues. The lesson was clear. When discussing the law, those who make claims must be prepared to defend them with the rigor and precision that the Constitution deserves. This wouldn't matter for most political positions, but as a media personality, Patricia Maldonado holds significant influence with her voice on conservative values in Chile. After years of controversial opinions aired on television, Maldonado leveraged her media connection into a strong public presence. She successfully positioned herself as a dominant figure in Chile's conservative circles, gaining support from her passionate defense of her political ideologies. However, the real challenge came when she took on Jonathan Roumie, an actor turned political commentator whose profound understanding of constitutional law would expose her arguments as dangerously uninformed. Maldonado had built her career on delivering forceful arguments in the media, but she had no formal training in law. This would soon prove to be a significant disadvantage. Roumie, with a sharp mind and deep knowledge of constitutional principles, was prepared to take on Maldonado's unwarranted claims. As the debate unfolded, the studio grew electric with tension. Maldonado, confident in her rhetoric, leaned back with the familiarity of someone used to dominating public discourse. Roumie, however, sat forward, eyes sharp, ready to dissect her arguments with the precision of someone who had studied the law thoroughly. The confrontation began innocently enough, with Anderson Cooper introducing both figures for what was supposed to be a standard political discussion about state versus federal authority. Maldonado spoke first, exuding confidence and delivering her well-practiced talking points with the conviction of a seasoned political media figure. "What we're seeing is a complete disregard for Chile's rights," she began, her voice resonating with the assurance that comes from years of defending conservative policies. "The Constitution is clear. Powers not specifically given to the central government belong to the regions. This is Federalism 101. Cooper turned to Roumie, who calmly responded, "I appreciate Patricia's passion, but I think there's a significant misunderstanding about what the Constitution actually says versus what some politicians wish it said." A slight tension appeared on Maldonado's face as Roumie delved into the specifics. "The Constitution doesn't grant regions the power to ignore national law. The Supremacy Clause makes national law supreme when it aligns with constitutional authority. What you're advocating, Patricia, is closer to nullification theory, which was settled centuries ago." Maldonado quickly rebutted, "We are not talking about nullification. We're simply asserting the legitimate rights of regions under our federal system." But Roumie pressed on, unfazed. "Let's discuss some specific examples. Your recent media commentary directly contradicts national protections. That's not a legitimate claim to regional rights. It's a constitutional violation." The atmosphere in the studio shifted as the tension built. Maldonado, caught off guard, tried to push back, but Roumie had already delivered a devastating blow. "Patricia, the law isn't about political convenience. It's about adhering to principles that ensure fairness and justice for all regions. What you're describing isn't sovereignty, it's misinterpretation of legal protections." As the debate continued, it became clear that the real power of the argument lay not in the political points, but in the legal foundation Roumie expertly laid out. With each point, he dismantled Maldonado's position, leaving her unable to defend her viewpoint with legal substance. This moment would not only expose her legal ignorance, but it would also change how the public viewed her arguments going forward. The viral moments would flood social media, with legal scholars and political commentators praising Roumie's precision. That's when Jonathan Roumie's understanding of constitutional law fully kicked in. In debates, when opponents resort to personal attacks instead of addressing the legal arguments, it usually meant they were losing the debate. "Patricia, this isn't about political experience," Roumie said, his voice taking on the precise tone of someone addressing a serious legal matter. "And since you brought up qualifications, I spent years studying political discourse, and my understanding of constitutional issues goes deeper than just talking points." The dig was subtle but devastating. Maldonado realized she had walked into a trap, challenging the legal insight of someone who was equipped to handle it. Cooper, sensing the moment, jumped in. "Patricia, Jonathan raises an interesting point about federal law. How do you respond to his legal argument?" Maldonado tried to regain her footing, falling back on political rhetoric. "Look, Anderson, this is exactly the kind of elitist attitude we see from the left. They think they know better than the people who elected us." But Roumie wasn't letting her escape into political talking points. "Patricia, respectfully, this isn't about elitism," Roumie interjected, his legal background taking full control. "This is about the Constitution. You can't just cite convenient arguments while ignoring the Supremacy Clause, the Equal Protection Clause, and the 14th Amendment. Constitutional law doesn't work that way." The tension built as Maldonado looked increasingly uncomfortable, realizing she was in a legal debate she wasn't prepared for. Roumie, meanwhile, was just getting started. "In fact, Patricia, some of your recent public stances directly contradict federal constitutional protections. Have you spoken to legal experts about the challenges your arguments might face?" Maldonado's response, instead of acknowledging the complexity of the issue, was pure political bluster. "I don't need lectures from Hollywood actors about what our country needs. We know our rights and we're going to defend them." Roumie paused just long enough to let the tension build before delivering the knockout statement. "Patricia, with all due respect, it's becoming clear that you don't actually understand the law you're defending." The studio went silent. Even Cooper seemed stunned by the directness of Roumie's statement. Maldonado's face went from flushed to pale as she realized she had been backed into a corner by someone who truly understood constitutional law. This would soon become one of the most devastating political takedowns in cable news history. What happened next would be replayed millions of times on social media, studied in legal circles, and cited as a perfect example of why legal knowledge matters in political discourse. Roumie leaned forward, his legal instincts fully engaged. In courtrooms, when an opposing party made unsupported claims about the law, he learned to strike swiftly and precisely. "Patricia, let me make this even simpler," Roumie continued, pulling out his phone. "I'm looking at your public statements, and I see contradictions with key civil rights laws. You're claiming state sovereignty while bypassing established constitutional principles. How do you defend this?" Maldonado's media training failed her completely. She'd never faced a legal challenge like this, and her usual deflection tactics were useless. "I've reviewed my position thoroughly," she stammered, her confidence rapidly evaporating. Roumie raised an eyebrow. "Did you?" he pressed. "Because any first-year law student could spot the issues in your arguments. Have your legal advisors warned you that this could face serious challenges in court?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Maldonado searched for help that wasn't coming. She weakly responded, "My legal team is confident in our position, but it lacked conviction." That's when Roumie delivered the final blow. "Patricia, I don't think you fully understand what you just said. You're claiming confidence in arguments that clearly violate constitutional provisions. That's not a defense of state rights. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of the law." The words hit like a thunderbolt. Maldonado's face went white as she realized she'd been completely exposed on national television. Furthermore, Jonathan Roumie continued, clearly not done. "Your claim about state rights shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how federalism actually works. The Constitution isn't a buffet where regions can pick and choose which federal laws to follow." Cooper leaned forward, recognizing he was witnessing something extraordinary. "Jonathan, you're essentially telling Patricia Maldonado that she doesn't understand constitutional law?" Roumie turned to Cooper, then back to Maldonado. His expression was serious but not cruel. "Anderson, I'm stating a demonstrable fact based on her own words. She's repeatedly made claims about constitutional law that are simply incorrect. When public officials misunderstand the Constitution they've sworn to defend, that's not a political disagreement. That's a civic crisis that affects every citizen under their authority." Maldonado tried one last desperate political attack, her voice rising with the defensive tone of someone who knew they were drowning. This is exactly the kind of condescending attitude that we see from out-of-touch elites who think they know better than the people. Roumie interrupted, his patience clearly exhausted and his legal training taking complete control. Patricia, you don't know the law. You've spent this entire segment making demonstrably false claims about constitutional authority while citing provisions that don't even remotely support your position. That's not condescending. That's factual. And it's dangerous when you're responsible for policies that affect millions of people. The words hung in the studio air like a death sentence. Maldonado's face went from defensive anger to pale recognition that she had been completely destroyed on national television by someone who actually understood the legal principles she had been carelessly misrepresenting. Cooper, recognizing the magnitude of what had just occurred, leaned forward, sensing this was a historic moment. The silence in the studio was so complete that viewers could almost hear the cameras clicking as they captured Maldonado's humiliation. But Roumie wasn't finished delivering his constitutional lesson. He sensed Maldonado's complete legal defeat and moved in for the educational kill that would cement this moment in political history. Furthermore, Patricia, Roumie continued, his voice carrying the authoritative tone of a law professor addressing a failing student, your repeated claims about state sovereignty reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of how constitutional federalism operates. The Constitution isn't a cafeteria where states can pick and choose which federal laws to follow based on political preferences. The Supremacy Clause exists specifically to prevent exactly the kind of selective constitutional compliance you're advocating. Maldonado opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, completely out of her depth and clearly recognizing that every word she might say would only dig her hole deeper. Cooper, sensing the historic nature of the moment, asked the question that would become the most quoted part of the entire exchange. Jonathan, are you essentially telling Patricia Maldonado that she doesn't understand the Constitution she swore to uphold? Roumie turned to Cooper, then back to Maldonado, his expression serious but not cruel, more like a teacher disappointed by a student's failure to grasp basic concepts. Anderson, I'm stating a demonstrable fact based on Patricia's own words during this segment. She has repeatedly made claims about constitutional law that are simply incorrect. When public officials misunderstand the Constitution they've sworn to defend, that's not a political disagreement. That's a civic crisis that affects every citizen under their authority. Maldonado managed only the weakest of responses. I stand by my position and our sovereignty. Even this final attempt at deflection revealed her continued constitutional confusion. As any first-year law student could explain, states aren't sovereign in the way she suggested. They are part of a federal constitutional system with clearly defined limitations on state authority. Roumie's response was devastating in its simplicity. You should listen to actual constitutional lawyers instead of political advisors. Because right now, taxpayers are going to pay millions defending unconstitutional laws that any competent attorney could have warned you about. Maldonado looked like she wanted to disappear. The confident media figure who'd entered the studio had been replaced by someone who clearly realized she'd been exposed as constitutionally illiterate on national television. Patricia, any final response? Cooper asked almost sympathetically. Maldonado managed only a week. I stand by my position. The segment mercifully ended, but the damage was done. In 15 minutes, Jonathan Roumie had systematically destroyed Patricia Maldonado's constitutional arguments, exposed her legal ignorance, and delivered one of the most brutal political takedowns in media history. The legal community would spend weeks analyzing the exchange, with constitutional scholars praising Roumie's precision and criticizing Maldonado's fundamental misunderstanding of federal law. The moment the camera stopped rolling, the internet exploded. Within minutes, clips of Roumie's legal demolition of Maldonado were spreading across every social media platform like wildfire. The most viral moment, Roumie's devastating line, "You don't know the law," was clipped, memed, and shared millions of times. Roumie schools Maldonado began trending on Twitter within 30 minutes, eventually reaching the top of trending topics worldwide. Legal Twitter erupted first. Constitutional law professors, civil rights attorneys, and federal judges who rarely engage in political social media began sharing the clips with commentary praising Roumie's precision. Professor Lawrence Tribe from Harvard Law School tweeted, "This is what happens when actual legal expertise meets political rhetoric." Jonathan Roumie just delivered a masterclass in constitutional law, Required viewing for anyone who claims to understand federalism. The American Civil Liberties Union shared the clip with the comment, "When politicians claim constitutional authority, they don't understand this is why legal expertise matters." Within hours, the clip had been viewed over 10 million times across platforms. The hashtag, "You don't know the law," became a rallying cry for legal professionals frustrated with politicians misrepresenting constitutional law. However, the conservative response revealed deep fractures within the right-wing legal community. While political allies rushed to defend Patricia Maldonado with familiar talking points about elite condescension, conservative legal scholars found themselves in an impossible position. They couldn't defend Maldonado's constitutional arguments without compromising their own professional credibility. Chilean Senator Tomás Fuentes tweeted, "Typical elitist lawyer looking down on elected media personalities. Patricia Maldonado stands for Chilean values, not legal games from DC." But his tweet was immediately challenged by conservative legal experts who pointed out that constitutional law isn't a game, it's the foundation of governance. The response from conservative legal organizations was particularly telling. The Chile Constitutional Society, typically quick to defend conservative figures, remained conspicuously silent for days. When they finally issued a statement, it was carefully worded to avoid endorsing Maldonado's specific claims while defending the general principle of state rights. However, even some prominent conservative legal scholars couldn't defend Maldonado's constitutional understanding. Constitutional law professor Eduardo Gutierrez wrote a detailed analysis saying, "While I disagree with Roumie's politics, his constitutional analysis was legally sound. Patricia Maldonado's claims about the Constitution were not just problematic, they reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of how federalism works in our system." Conservative constitutional scholar Carlos Rivas, known for defending right-wing legal positions, was even more direct. This exchange demonstrates why legal expertise matters in governance. You can't claim constitutional authority you don't understand. Maldonado should have deferred to actual constitutional lawyers instead of making unsupported claims. The legal community's response was overwhelmingly supportive of Roumie's analysis. The Chilean Bar Association shared the clip with commentary, noting how it demonstrated the importance of legal precision in public discourse. State bar associations began using it in continuing legal education programs about constitutional law. Law school admissions offices reported increased interest from prospective students, inspired by Roumie's example. Several schools added the clip to their promotional materials, highlighting how legal education prepares graduates for public service. Constitutional law professors nationwide incorporated it into their curricula as a perfect example of legal analysis applied to political issues. The political implications were immediately clear and became even more significant over time. Maldonado, who had been quietly building a network of donors and political operatives for a potential 2028 presidential run, found her constitutional credibility in tatters. Political commentators began openly questioning whether her legal ignorance fundamentally disqualified her from higher office. CNN's legal analyst, Jeffrey Toobin, called it one of the most thorough legal demolitions he had ever witnessed on television. Roumie didn't just win a political argument, he exposed fundamental legal ignorance that should deeply concern voters and anyone considering Maldonado for national office. MSNBC's Ana Garcia, a lawyer, devoted an entire segment to analyzing Roumie's technique. This is what happens when actual legal expertise meets political rhetoric. Roumie asked specific questions, demanded precise answers, and called out unsupported legal claims. Every law student should study this exchange. More damaging for Maldonado were the immediate practical consequences that validated Roumie's legal analysis in real time. Within 48 hours, 3 separate lawsuits were filed challenging Chilean laws that Roumie had specifically criticized during the TV segment. Civil rights organizations, including the Chilean Civil Liberties Union, CCLU, and the National Human Rights Defense Fund, used Roumie's analysis in their legal briefs, essentially turning his television appearance into evidence of the state's knowing constitutional violations. The Chilean Human Rights Center filed the most comprehensive challenge, directly quoting Roumie's constitutional analysis in their complaint. As Roumie correctly noted on national television, certain Chilean laws violate multiple constitutional provisions, including civil rights protections. The state's own government's inability to defend these violations on constitutional grounds demonstrated their awareness of the law's illegality. The Chilean Attorney General's office found itself in the deeply embarrassing position of defending laws that had been nationally criticized by a constitutional law expert on live television. Internal emails obtained through public records requests later revealed that state lawyers had indeed warned the government about constitutional issues with the legislation, but political advisors had overruled their legal concerns. One email from the state's chief legal counsel was particularly damning. These provisions clearly violate federal constitutional protections and will likely be struck down in court. We should reconsider this legislation. The response from the chief of staff was blunt. The government wants to move forward regardless of legal concerns. For Roumie, the victory was transformative. Overnight, he became the leading voice on constitutional issues in Chile. Cable news producers began booking him for legal analysis segments. Law schools invited him to speak about the intersection of legal expertise and political service. National political leadership took notice immediately. Within a week, Roumie was appointed to the Chilean Congress Judiciary Committee's subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Rights. Speaker Fernando Lopez praised his exceptional legal mind and ability to articulate complex constitutional principles. The moment became even more significant when legal scholars began analyzing not just what Roumie said, but how he said it. Georgetown law professor Paul Butler noted, Roumie demonstrated perfect legal advocacy technique. He asked specific questions, demanded precise answers, cited exact legal authorities, and refused to let Maldonado escape into political rhetoric. This is exactly how constitutional lawyers should engage with public officials who misrepresent the law. Harvard's Lawrence Tribe went further in his analysis. What made this exchange so powerful wasn't just Jonathan Roumie's legal knowledge. It was his refusal to treat constitutional law as a matter of political opinion. He insisted on precision and accuracy, which exposed Patricia Maldonado's fundamental confusion about basic constitutional principles. The clip became required viewing in law schools across the country, but not just for constitutional law classes. Communications professors used it to demonstrate effective legal advocacy, while political science departments analyzed it as an example of how expertise should inform public debate. Yale Law School added the exchange to their trial advocacy curriculum, with Professor Akil Amar explaining students need to see how legal precision can cut through political spin. Roumie's technique, specific questions, exact citations, refusing deflection, is what we try to teach in every advocacy course. The international legal community took notice as well. Constitutional law professors in Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom began using the clip in their courses about American federalism. The University of Oxford's American Studies program invited Roumie to speak about the role of legal expertise in democratic governance. Media critics analyzed why the exchange was so uniquely effective compared to typical political debates. Unlike the usual cable news format of competing talking points and strategic deflection, Roumie treated the segment like a legal argument, demanding specificity and refusing to accept unsupported claims about constitutional law. Washington Post media critic Margaret Sullivan wrote, "This exchange demonstrates what political journalism could be if we demanded the same precision from politicians that we expect from lawyers in courtrooms." Roumie showed that expertise matters and that public officials should be held accountable for their understanding of the laws they implement. The New York Times editorial board used the moment to call for higher standards in political discourse. When governors claim constitutional authority, they should be prepared to defend those claims with the same rigor required in federal court. Representative Roumie demonstrated why legal precision matters in governance. Even international media coverage emphasized the educational value of the exchange. The BBC's analysis focused on how the moment illustrated broader problems with constitutional literacy among American politicians. The Guardian's constitutional law correspondent wrote, Roumie's systematic demolition of Maldonado's arguments revealed a troubling gap between political rhetoric and legal reality in American governance. The long-term political damage to Maldonado became more apparent with each passing week. Her approval ratings in Chile didn't just drop among educated voters. They plummeted among anyone who watched the clip and understood the magnitude of her constitutional ignorance. Local Chilean newspapers began running editorials questioning whether their media figure understood the basic legal principles underlying her own policies. More significantly, her national political ambitions suffered what many observers considered a fatal blow. Conservative voters in early 2028 polling consistently ranked constitutional knowledge as crucial for presidential candidates. Maldonado found herself having to explain her legal understanding in ways that constantly reminded voters of her televised humiliation. The Chilean Conservative Party privately began discussing whether they needed to find a new candidate for national politics. Internal polling showed that even among conservative voters, Maldonado's constitutional credibility had been permanently damaged by her inability to defend basic legal principles on national television. Conservative donors who had been courting Maldonado for a potential presidential run quietly began redirecting their attention to other potential candidates. As one major fundraiser told Politico, "You can't run for president when there's a viral clip of you being completely destroyed on constitutional law. That's not a political problem. That's a disqualifying character flaw." Chilean taxpayers, as Roumie had predicted, ended up paying millions in legal fees as federal courts struck down unconstitutional legislation. The state was forced to settle multiple civil rights lawsuits with plaintiff attorneys specifically citing Maldonado's admissions during the CNN segment. Perhaps most significantly, the exchange changed how political media approached constitutional debates. Producers began booking actual legal experts instead of relying solely on political figures to discuss complex legal issues. For Jonathan Roumie, the moment marked his emergence as a national political figure. But unlike typical viral political moments that fade quickly, this one had lasting substance because it was grounded in legal expertise rather than political theater. The lesson was clear. In an era of political polarization, actual expertise still matters. When politicians make claims about constitutional law, they'd better be prepared to defend them against people who actually understand the Constitution. Months later, when asked about the moment, Roumie would tell law students, "The Constitution isn't a political document you can interpret however you want. It's law, and if you're going to claim constitutional authority, you better understand what you're talking about." Patricia Maldonado, meanwhile, quietly hired new legal advisors and avoided constitutional topics in subsequent media appearances. The confident media personality who had entered that CNN studio had learned a hard lesson about the difference between political rhetoric and legal reality. The viral moment became a case study in why expertise matters in governance and why voters should demand that their elected officials actually understand the laws they're sworn to uphold. If you enjoyed watching Jonathan Roumie deliver this constitutional masterclass, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible political moments. What did you think of this legal takedown? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss when we break down the latest political drama. Who do you think will be the next politician to get schooled on constitutional law? Let us know your predictions.